How's it going, everybody? In this video I'm going to be showing you a mono red budget commander deck. This deck uses Zada Hedron Grinder as the commander. Whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets this card, we get to copy that for each other creature we control. So this deck looks to summon a bunch of cheap creatures, and then use very cheap pump spells to get all of your creatures very large. This deck aims to go very wide, so oftentimes we do have to overcommit. However, with that extra risk, it allows us to get wins out of nowhere because of the surprise factor and element of this deck. One card we run in the deck is Mirror Wing Dragon, which is basically a copy of Zada. Let's start off with the more expensive creatures in this deck. These two Krenkos and Goblin Rabble Master help summon a lot of Goblin token creatures. Even though they're 1/1s, again, it doesn't really matter because we're just going to be pumping them up. Krenko is a little expensive at $6, but it allows this deck to generate a lot of tokens, which we do need. These next three goblins allow us to summon even more goblins, but these cards also allow us to grow our goblins or sacrifice them to deal damage to our opponent or create even more tokens. One of the worst elements of this deck is the inability to save your creatures from board wipes. One way we get around this is by sacrificing our goblins in response to certain spells. Next up, we have cards that will continually allow us to generate more tokens. Whenever we cast instant or sorcery spell, we create a 1/1 elemental token with Young Pyromancer. Every time we target the Crusader with this spell, we're going to create a 1/1 soldier. And Chandra's Zero ability will allow us to generate two 1/1 elementals. The Garrison is great since every time we attack, we're going to get two 1/1 elementals that are also tapped and attacking. Squee has haste, and every time it attacks, we're going to get a 1/1 goblin. We can also cast this from our graveyard. And Scrapping Scourge is going to allow us to generate two 1/1 elemental creature tokens that also have haste. So these are some explosive cards that whenever they hit the battlefield, they're basically going to be attacking and summoning us even more tokens, which if we have the commander out with some pump spells, it can get very surprising for our opponent. Each of these cards have an enter the battlefield effect that when they hit the field will generate us tokens. Emrakul's Hatcher is a little bit expensive on the mana curve. However, we aren't playing that many more expensive creatures or spells. Cards like Dragon Fodder and Hordling Outburst are going to generate us 2 or 3 tokens. And Goblin Instigators are 1/1, but it also generates a token as well. Here are just some more cards that are going to generate us some tokens. Empty the Warrens is pretty good because if we get our opponents to cast some spells, this has Storm, so we'll be able to generate a lot of tokens. The Rebirth is pretty good because if we sacrifice an artifact, it's going to give us 3 tokens for 1 mana. We are playing some artifacts that can easily get sacrificed, so that is also another option. So next up are some really cheap pump spells that we're going to be targeting Zada with and hopefully all of our other creatures. Cards like Brute Force and Reckless Charge are going to give it +3. And again, if we're targeting Zada, we're also able to target every other goblin. So that can give us a huge board of 4/4 goblins for just 1 mana. Downhill Charge is pretty awesome because you can sacrifice a mountain instead of paying the mana cost. Each creature is going to get +X to the end of turn where X is the number of mountains you control. So at the cost of sacrificing 1 mountain, each creature can get something like +5, +6 because we are playing a lot of mountains. Here are just some more pump spells. The first 2 allow us to scry, and the other one has the potential to destroy an artifact if we need. Again, here's some more pump spells. Otherworld Outburst is great because if we target a creature and it dies, we actually get a 3/2 Eldrazi creature on the battlefield. Again, this deck is very susceptible to removal and board wipes, so having cards like this allows us to recoup our board just in case if something bad happens. These 3 cards aren't pump spells, but they give our creatures benefits, as well as draw us cards, which we do need in this deck. Unleash Fury is going to double the power of all of our creatures. Again, assuming we're targeting Zada. Temur Battle Rage is going to give it double strike and potentially trample. And Invigorated Rampage for 2 mana is going to give us +4. It's not really going to make sense in this deck to use the other effect. The last pump spell we're running is this one. Target creature gains +1/+1 and gains haste at the end of turn. And we can also play this from our graveyard just in case. Next up are some mana ramping cards. I like these in the deck because again, it allows for the explosiveness and to pull the wins out of nowhere. This deck doesn't run too many lands, and we don't really need that many lands. However, on the turns that we're going to want to pop off, having 1 or 2 extra mana makes this deck go a lot farther than a lot of other decks. Because again, having 1 extra mana can allow us to potentially use a pump spell that targets every single creature. Next up are some creatures that actually give us some extra mana. Defiler of Instincts can allow us to use our life as a resource to cast spells. We can also deal damage to any target when we cast a red spell. We're only playing red spells, so if Runaway Steam Can is on the battlefield, we are going to be able to generate a lot of extra mana just by removing counters from it. And we're also playing a lot of Goblin spells, so Goblin War Chief is going to assist in that. I did just say we're playing all red spells, however we are playing like 3 artifacts. The Iron Mire is going to allow us to add some red to our mana. Hazard's Monument is going to allow us to get our red spells out faster. We can also draw a card and discard a card if we cast a creature spell. Simian Spirit Guide is there just to potentially exile to get 1 extra free red source. Then we got cards like Fire Diamond and Mind Stone just as some extra mana and potential draw. These two cards are just free cards to have. Again, we want to build a huge wide board of cheap creatures. Since these cards are 0 mana, they're basically just free. Every time Dreadhorde Arcanist attacks, we can cast an instant or sorcery in the graveyard for free. Obviously if it meets the conditions of the card, but since we're pumping with pump spells, the power of this card can get very large, so we can cast almost any instant or sorcery for free. Whenever Goblin Dark Dwellers enters the battlefield, we're going to be able to cast instant sorcery 3 or less for free. Like mentioned before, this deck has a hard time dealing with board wipes, and since we're running a lot of goblins, these two cards are going to allow us to sacrifice our goblins to actually make them a resource. Some removal we run is Chaos Warp, Lightning Bolt, and Abrade. Chaos Warp is definitely the best removal in this deck. However, cards like Lightning Bolt and Abrade are just some cheap extra spells to have. Kari is a fun card because we can steal a creature their opponent controls and use it against them. Then we can cast a converted mana cost card of 2 or less from our hand without paying the cost. And again, the ability to cast a simple pump spell that has the ability to target every single creature on our field is pretty impactful. Invoke Calamity allows us to cast some spells from our graveyard, and Seize the Day is going to allow us to have 2 battle phases in combat, which is pretty spicy. It does also have Flashback. Daredevil is a way to just steal an instant or sorcery from our opponent's graveyard. Gutter Snipe is going to be able to deal 2 damage to each opponent every time we cast a spell, and Goblin Trashmaster is there to destroy every single artifact. As long as we sacrifice a goblin, which is very doable in this deck, if Trashmaster is on the field, no artifact should exist on the field. Ideally, we want to cast Swift Foot Boots on Zada to help protect it, and give it haste obviously so it can attack that turn. Faithless Looting is going to allow us to search for the cards we actually want or need. Tectonic Reformation is going to turn over lands in our hands to actually something useful. Castle Embereth is okay because it can give our creatures +1 to the end of turn. We also are going to run some cycle lands such as Forgotten Cave, Smoldering Crater, and Desert of the Fervent. The last lands are Cur Keep, it can generate as a token. Also Dwarf Mine does generate as a token when it enters the battlefield. And then we're running 26 lands. This deck is pretty cheap and spicy. It does have the ability to pull wins out of nowhere. I think one of the best things about this deck is the surprise factor and being able to combo off in a single turn. The major downfall of this deck though is a potential board wipe. We do run cards that are going to try to help mitigate this. And if you're still watching this video, definitely check out the comments down below because some people are going to leave some spicy extra tech that I missed out below. Thanks for watching everybody, take care, I'll see you later.